Namaste viewers, welcome to Jaipur Dialogues JDUSA, starting after 2 weeks of break. And that break was because we had a timing schedule change, and starting today, we will have the new time of Saturday, 10:30 a.m. Eastern. So welcome back. And I'm very glad to restart the show, as the saying goes. Today, we are going to talk about how Mr. Modi has impacted the global scenario with reference to Hindus and India. And living abroad, most of us Indians have been mostly very energized and inspired and have kind of regained our lost roots. The Dhimmi in us is dying. To talk about this matter, I have a wonderful privilege of having Mr. Saurav Dutt, a remarkable young man who lives in London. And Saurav has written a book, Modi and Me. Let's talk about it, Saurav, and tell us about this entire thing and the background of a very significant advertisement put in Wall Street Journal, where the journal advertisement, which is a conservative newspaper, mostly sides with Republican on business issues, has chosen to put an ad which is false, which is bigoted, and directly attacks the entire infrastructure of Prime Minister Modi's government and the administration. Looks like Wall Street Journal wanted to make its money from the advertising, and I'm sure they made good money. But that's truly a sad reflection on ignoring the vast majority of what I prefer to call the largest minority in the world, the Hindus. In the analogy of minority and majority, you have Christian world and you have Muslim world, and then you have the Hindu world, and we are the minority in the world affairs. So share your thoughts going forward. What inspired you to do the book on Mr. Modi? You have referred in your book 2014 as the turning point. Tell us what happened before and how did the inspiration come from, because the world needs to know, and particularly the young Indians need to know. Your time.
Namaskar to the Jaipur Dialogues audience. So yes, I think like many individuals, young Indians around the world, young Hindus around the world, since prior to 2014, perhaps they were quite agnostic about Hinduism, Sanatana Dharma, about the history of India, its civilization, its culture, its importance. They knew enough, but perhaps they weren't so proud to profess their culture and their faith and their love and worship of history and Indian culture in so loud a manner. And what we found since 2014 is we had with Modi ji an individual who was proud to be a Hindu, who was proud to wear his religion on his sleeve, to extol the virtues and wonder of India, of Bharat, its civilization, its history, its freedom fighters, and to position the country as a growing power within the world, a growing influence within the world that deserved respect, demanded respect, that did not need to take orders from former colonial powers or anyone else. So slowly and surely, we saw a side of India and Bharat that wasn't prevalent up to that point. From 2014 until now, we have seen, not just through Modi ji, but through the BJP as well as through many elements of the government and NGOs and spokespersons, that they aren't afraid to talk about India as it should be, which is a growing power that is unashamed of who it is and its past and its culture, and is willing to embrace all of that. But what we saw at the same time was the enemies of Bharat, of Hinduism, of left-wing echo chambers and urban Naxals, really, who had started to coalesce and started to arm themselves with knowledge, arm themselves with narratives and media houses and soft power and thought leadership papers and think tanks. And slowly and surely what they started to do was to build this erroneous, false narrative around India, around the Modi. So they started bringing up all of the canons and falsehoods around 2002, They wanted to paint Modi ji as being a leader of a fascist country, of a fascist organization, all of these falsehoods. And slowly and surely, with every growing year, this movement has gained power. And more to the point, it hasn't gained power just within India. It's spread its tentacles all over the globe. And as you alluded to with the Wall Street Journal, it has become a very nascent, powerful force within the United States, especially within the United Kingdom, where I'm sitting now as well. And with every growing month, it seems, their anger, their resolve against Modi ji, against the BJP, against the RSS, against any element, individual or organization that wants to talk about India and Bharat in a positive way, what's happened is that this movement has become even angrier, become even more powerful, and is not hesitating to use all of its powers at its disposal, whether they are writers from an Indian background, whether they are foreign writers, whether they are reports, whether they are spurious research organizations or think tanks of this nature. They are growing in stature, growing in self-belief, and they are propagating all of this false knowledge around the world. And what's happening at the same time is that while Modi ji and his supporters around the world are doubling down and are embracing their faith, and we're seeing a new generation of younger Indians who are proud of who they are and proud of the country from where they've come from, you're finding that the two sides are now pitted against each other. So what was happening in my own journey, which is perhaps one that is mirrored by those of many of your younger listeners, is that I eventually just became fed up of the falsehoods and the narratives and the propaganda I was being fed from the United Kingdom, whether it's The Guardian, whether it's Time magazine, whether it's the New York Post or the New York Times or any of these powerful media houses. I began to read and became extremely angry within myself. And I could see what were clearly falsehoods. I mean, I go to India every year. I can see how it's developing, how powerful it's becoming. I can see that the fact that we want to celebrate our civilization and our heroes like Shivaji, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, for example, that this is not a negative thing. And I could see that the culture and the country I was born in and embraced and loved so much was being denigrated and constantly being misaligned by all of these lies and these half-truths and these twisted narratives. I thought that for myself, what can I do? I can at least put myself out there, my platform, my voice, to combat against a lot of these propagandists. And whether it's on social media, whether it's through blogs and work such as this, eventually I got to the point where I said, look, I'm an author, let me put my strengths to paper and put together a book that really talks about this journey, this issue, the growth of Hinduphobia. Since 2014 particularly, it's always been there, but it's really grown since 2014. And that's why I released Modi and Me, and the subtitle is Modi and Me, A Political Reawakening, because I think many young Hindus around the world and Hindus of every walk of life and background have reawakened since 2014, because Modi ji has permitted them to be proud about their culture and to talk about it in a way that they should be unafraid. And what's happened is that the more Hindus have shown that they're willing to talk about their culture and their history and their religion in a loud fashion, the more the voices against them have coalesced and grown. And that's very telling, because that tells us that the enemies of Hinduism and Hindutva and our entire culture and civilization have always been there. And what they resent is that if we dare to talk about ourselves in a proud manner, this is what they detest the most, because they want Sanatana Dharma and Hindus around the world to be quiet, to be pliant, to not to not ruffle feathers, to not shake the boat, to essentially be quiet, to be submissive and deferential. But that time has passed. So I'm hoping that this book will allow many individuals around the world to understand that they too should be proud of who they are and the message that they can perceive, and that they can uplift all of those Hindus around the world who have been hitherto reticent, a little bit shy, and that they don't need to be shy about who they are and how proud they are about where they come from, because that's what our enemies want. They want us to be quiet and to slip away into the shadows. But hopefully that time has come, because I see Hindutva and Hinduism resurgent now more than ever, and that's a wonderful thing.
I'm so glad with your opening statement, because we seem to align on our thinking. And just as you decided on your own to put your entire thing in your perspective, that you wanted to use your talent of being an author in words and put it in paper, I chose the path to contest the election. And I must tell you that it is a remarkable journey. I mean, you and I are on individual journey to make the minority voice be heard, seen, felt, and known. That's what is important for us to do that. Now, you refer to the word coalesce, how the enemies of Hindus, and I put it in the enemies of all things Hindu, for those people who are afraid of, frightened of, or hate everything Hindu, they have definitely coalesced. And the one thing Mr. Modi has done, whether we like it or not, is the fact that he has put the enemies out of their pigeonholes or out of their holes. Now there is no, the very nice Sanskrit word, mithya, the falsehood living with us. We can't live with a falsehood that everybody loves us. The whole concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam itself has been challenged. According to their words, we don't belong in that Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. They don't even want us there. So the question here is again very important. What is it that makes them nuts about us? And I'm putting it in that fashion. Why do they hate us so much?
Yeah.
Particularly in the background of the fact that we are the most peaceful, law-abiding citizens anywhere as an immigrant or in India. And the second part is also very important, is that we are not a law and order problem anywhere. Anywhere.
Oh, yes.
But this is being made, we are made as a villains. Where do you think it starts from? Where is the game plan? Is to demolish the entire Hindu and Sanatan practices? It's not going to go. So,
it's very complex, but I think it ultimately stems from a distaste for the religion itself, and that is breeded from the times of empire, from the times when missionaries from the British Raj went in, tried to proselytize, and tried to really dispel any notion that Sanatana Dharma and Hinduism was a religion worthy of respect. So they went in with a mission statement all those years ago, talking about the virtues of an Abrahamic faith and a monotheistic religion. And their idea was that Hindus were pagans, that they were unclean, that they were uncivilized, that they needed to be bettered, that these native people needed to learn the wonders of Christianity, and that they needed to be taught. And it started with that original mission statement. But of course, that was only after the rule of Islamist Mughal invasions in that region. And in that case, it was about the kafir and the infidel. And in that case, it wasn't just about conversion, it was about eradication. So you have these two extremely powerful forces that started way back when, during the time of conquest, and they managed to inculcate a sense within the populace, even within India, that they too should feel inferior. And that is why there were so many converts, and that is why so many tribals were targeted and sought to be converted, to hate their own kind, to hate their own religion. And that was one of the reasons as well. Excuse me. And what's happened since then is it has grown and become, it has become through thought leadership and through left-wing nexuses in the West. And they have competed together and come together to portray this mission statement that Hinduism is a pagan religion and inferior. And it has grown since then, since those times. And now they work hand in glove.
You okay? You are drinking a lot of water. Your throat is dry, or you are nervous?
No, it's I'm getting over a getting over a cold. That's all it
Okay.
is. And he gave me a sore throat.
Okay. Take it easy. All right. The other part which I wanted to share with the viewers and with you as well, that despite my election time, I was able to read large segments of your book. And you have broken it up in a remarkably simple way. It almost reads as a conversation. And and you have not tried to intellectualize the problems as much as you have to try to say it in a layman's language. So that's very powerful. Share with me about, I noticed that entire thing has been done extremely well. By the way, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, this is not a book promotion conversation. It's about the issue that bedevils us, because we are under attack from everywhere, and that we need to arise and protect and defend ourselves. So there is one element that people talk about very often, that rise of Hindu phobia and all has happened. But there is a role of people like us, people, Indian diaspora worldwide. Where exactly are we missing out in our role and responsibilities? Because back home in India, people still look upon us as those who left the country and went out for greener pastures. They do not pay enough respect. I would put the word as respect, that we are doing a lot for our motherland, our country that we left behind. We still go there. We do investments. We do varieties of things. And even today here, we fight for our rights. But somewhere along the line, majority of the Indians in UK and US particularly are Democrats. It beats the hell out of me that we are essentially conservative people, yet we are sucking up to the Democrats, who are most of the time, and the Labour Party in your country, who eventually exploit us, take us for granted. So tell us your thoughts on this matter, particularly when you say in your book, what is that called? A true Hindu will not be manipulated. You have spent a whole chapter saying a true Hindu will not be manipulated. Yet, we Hindus are manipulated here. Are we not true Hindus? Talking about the British and the American aspect. And if we are manipulated, then that means we are not true Hindus. It's a very controversial statement. Tell us more about it.
Well, what's happened with both our countries is you've got Hindus who have considered themselves to be the good immigrants, and they've come into these countries and they perceived that there was a great deal of racism initially, so they gravitated towards the allegedly left-wing party, which was the Democrats or the Labour Party. And what happened at that time is that they initially knew that they could obtain votes from the Hindu diaspora initially. But what happened was that these groups have become swayed by left-wing forces which have aligned themselves with the Islamists. And the Islamists have no time for Hindus and what they feel, and their opinions and their backgrounds and their culture and their civilization. And the Hindus themselves have been too compliant, dealing with their own lives, materializing material wealth, enriching themselves, donating to these parties, that they haven't thought about their own communities and what they can do and the threats to their communities. So what's happened is that the Islamists have taken root and their sense of victimhood has grown, and their exponential power within both parties has grown to such an extent that the Hindus have been dwarfed. And what's happened is that while they have projected themselves and their strength and their power and their voice over decades, Hindus have been extremely quiet. All they've cared about are about their communities and enriching themselves and temples and mandirs and soft power such as this. And what's happened, and they've become lost in the mix, is that as the Islamist factions have grown and the left-wing factions have grown, they have decided to pick on the easy target, which is what they've always considered to be an inferior religion, which is Hinduism. And while they initially picked on Hinduism, what's happened of late is it's because of 2014 and Modi ji, because there's been this paradigm shift in terms of the representation of Hindus worldwide and the BJP and talking about our culture and our civilization in a prouder way, they've become angered. And so what's happened is that the Democrats have had no respect for the Hindu vote because the Islamist vote has seemed to them to be far more important. And that's been mirrored definitely in the UK as well. The Labour Party is riddled with those who basically support Pakistan and think more about Pakistan than Britain, for example. And what's happened then is that they've always resurrected issues such as Kashmir, for example, that have no place in the British political sphere at all. And yet they keep resurrecting this, they keep bringing it up, they keep injecting Modi and the BJP and the RSS into the British diaspora and political mainframe, even though most people on the street do not know anything about these issues nor care about them. British Hindus may well care about them, but they do not vote for them when they are dealing with them in the UK Parliament because they know that they're not going to shift the Kashmir debate by voting for the Conservative Party or the Labour Party. But whereas the Islamists do feel that they will be able to, because they will have a voting bloc and an MP who is listening to their concerns and will raise those issues. And that's what you've seen with Labour, because they are raising all of these movements about Kashmir within their Labour Party conferences, which do not belong there at all. And so what's happening is that there's been a shift there, and Hindus have allowed themselves to be manipulated because they haven't been vocal and they haven't been cognizant of all of these issues that are happening in the background. So they're dealing with their own communities, but they're not voicing their concerns. And what's happening is that it slowly leads to a position such as we've seen in Leicester and Birmingham recently, where the entire narrative shifts to blame the victims, who are the Hindus, as the perpetrators and the villains. And that is what has happened. That is what is the cost of allowing yourself to be manipulated, is that the other side completely pounces on the narrative and projects the image. And they have been successful, sadly, and they have portrayed the Hindus as the villains and the Islamists as the victims. And it's still being portrayed and played out today. And it's extremely sad to see. Now, while we see within India that there is a younger diaspora that is educating themselves and is becoming far more strident and less willing to be manipulated, I'm not so sure that that's happened in the US and the UK as much as it should have. There are good signs, and there are signs that it's moving in that direction, but a lot of work needs to be done.
I totally agree with you, because what is also happening, the storyline, there are very few Indians who are openly critical about India who are living overseas. But there are Indians in India who have lost their credibility thanks to Mr. Modi. They are the ones who have tremendous amount of access to money, and they are the ones who are writing in the Western press. It's very interesting that they are trying to raise the bogey from overseas, though they are living in India or they are Indians. So tell us this phenomenon. You talked about Hindus being compliant and submissive and more accepting. Is this such a severe colonial mentality that has beset us? How does it juxtapose with the reality of a true Indian, a true Hindu, who will not get manipulated? How does that work actually?
Well, the links to this always go back to the colonial period. There have always been Indians who were enamored with the invading power. They were enamored with the British Raj, with Britain itself, with the romantic notion of empire, the romantic notion of this island all the way across the world. And so some of these individuals fell so in love with the way they spoke, the way they dressed, the way they comported themselves, that they wanted to emulate themselves. And subconsciously, whether through their backgrounds, whether through their families, or because they were so easily to manipulate, that they slowly saw India, Hinduism, and their fellow Indians as inferior. They became whitewashed. They saw themselves as inferior to a certain class and caliber of Indians. And over the years, these generations have grown and become intellectualized and have educated themselves. And they have always seen for themselves a very Nehruvian specific version of India that they wanted to create and wished had been created all this time. And it has angered them that the dynastic rule of Congress rule and its corrupt regimes are no longer in vogue, have no longer been voted in by the populace. And it angers them so much that the Indian population has twice voted in a right of centre regime that is proud of its culture and its background. So they have weaponized themselves with the only power that they have, the soft power of academia and media. And they love the fact that a foreign voice or a foreign media house is the one who is pouring scorn on India. For them, that validates their opinions, it validates their propaganda. So they know that within India they can only go so far, and within a right of centre regime they will be ridiculed, which they often are within India too. But what they love is the adulation of the foreigner and the foreign power, whether it's The Guardian, whether it's New York Times or Washington Post. And that goes back to that same colonial mentality. They are happy to take their money, they're happy to give money, as long as the white man is the one who's supporting them and is supporting them in denigrating their country. And that goes right back all the way to that infatuation and love of the foreigner, not of the Mughal so much, but of the British Raj itself. And in terms of what that means for the modern day Hindu, it is still today, we still have the Lutyens media, we still have the Delhi set, which loves to emulate the English, wants to speak English all the time, really turns its nose up at any semblance of Hinduism and Sanatana Dharma and Sanskrit and age-old values and civilization, and nothing to them is sacred. What is sacred to them is the adulation and the comradeship of foreigners. And it's extremely sad, and it will take a few generations for that mindset to wipe out, I feel, because it's only been 200, 300 years since British Raj rule. But there will always be Hindus like this, who are easy to turn against their own, who are easy to ally themselves with left-wing houses that are rabidly Marxist and despise anything that is right of centre. And they still feel that India needs to be civilized and Hinduism needs to be civilized, even though it's a 5,000-year-old civilization itself. And so now they have picked on their favorite term, which is Hindutva, which they do not understand, which has always been a fluid understanding of Hinduism, which was never codified or defined, but they have sought to define it along their own parameters of propaganda, because they know they can't outwardly criticize Hinduism itself, because that would be extremely xenophobic and racist. So they would rather use the term Hindutva as a proxy in order to funnel their propaganda through. But unfortunately, these Hindus will be around for a long time. Wherever you go around the world, whether it's any colonial power, ex-power, you will find examples of those who will they live for adulation from the white man and the foreigner and the Westerner, and they will continue to do so, sadly. And the only way we can combat that is to constantly rebut their arguments, make them look ridiculous, underline and rebut all of their false op-eds around the world with facts, and make them look like the fools that they are. That is the only way forward.
That's a very powerful suggestion you have given, to make a fool of themselves with facts. That's what is important. Because so many Hindus in America, for that matter, I don't know much about the England part of the story, although I interact with Mr. Pandit Satish Sharma ji a lot. He has been on our shows many times, and he's a personal good friend. Important part here again is that the word Hindutva, it is a coterminous word. We know there is nothing evil about Hindutva, even if it is a word called Hindutva. It's a tattva. It comes, Hindu tattva is Hindutva. So the tattva, you can't demolish the tattva the way it is. But the majority of the young people who are in your age group, they are totally swayed by the years of education, and where we as parents failed in America to interact with the Parents Teachers Association as much as we should have done, we ought to have done. Now the challenge is those people who have now blossomed and become young men and women in the community, they have somewhere along the line, the thought has made home in their heads that Hindutva is evil without they knowing. If you ask them to define, they have no definition. They only talk about the extreme part of it. How does one address that to the younger group? Particularly the parents have no way. They don't listen to parents anymore because they don't need to, because they have grown up independently. That's the way the life they have become for them. How does one address that? Not everybody is Saurav Dutt.
Well, one way to address it is to really continue to read and expand your knowledge. With Hindutva, if we're going to go back into how it was defined, into how some of its adherents adopted it, then they should understand about, for example, about Veer Savarkar. They should understand about what Savarkar had to deal with, how is Savarkar different to Gandhi, and they should understand and clear up some of the falsehoods. So they want to talk about the RSS, but they don't talk about it completely. So, for example, the RSS has a Muslim wing. How can the RSS be so rabidly anti-Muslim and want to slaughter Muslims around the world if they have a Muslim wing? What about the fact that during COVID and lockdown, the RSS assisted communities, all communities in India, including Muslim communities? So these are some of the facts on the ground that they need to understand and not take the Western op-eds as gospel, which is what's happening. They're reading something and they're taking a few arbitrary occasions that happen and they believe that as fact. And they're not looking into history, they're not looking into understanding about context, and then failing to see the conflation of the term Hindutva with Hinduism. Because when these criticisms are made, they're lazy, they're intellectually lazy, they're bereft of facts and logic, and they're simply saying things like, India is descending into a fascist Hindutva state and all of these things. And they need to think about the facts, such as Article 370's abrogation in Kashmir and how that's improved Kashmir. Will they talk about that? Will they talk about the fact that the CAA is to assist minorities that are under extreme stress and strife in neighboring regions? They won't talk about that, for example. They won't talk about the facts, but they will believe in the propaganda, because what's happening is that Hindutva and anti-Hindu and the Hindu-phobic cabals, what they're doing is that their headlines are screaming. They're presenting worst-case scenarios, apocalyptic type headlines, which are complete fantasy, and they're not rooted in fact. And the more you dig and delve into these articles and these thought papers and things of this nature, you'll find that they are just completely confecting and fabricating information. Whether they're talking about Gujarat 2002, for example, they always seem to paint over and neglect the fact that so many Hindu pilgrims were killed on that train from Godhra. And they won't talk about the fact that two individuals within the Gujarat regime were imprisoned, not Modi, and Modi was not the one who was overseeing this pogrom, for example. So they take all of this propaganda as fact and they don't combat it with knowledge, and that's because they're not reading about information, and that's because other than, for example, channels like this, there are not so many Indian groups that are right of center, whether on YouTube, whether on the internet itself, that are talking about these issues. Because the one thing that the Hindus have failed to do is to successfully combine into powerful media houses that rival these other chains. Of course, we've got news channels in India, but that is not mirrored elsewhere. We've got wonderful organizations in the US, for example, that are looking to rectify these falsehoods, but they are relatively new organizations. Those within the UK are woeful, other than the ones, for example, that are led by Pandit Satish Sarma, for example, and Insight. The ones that have the most power, such as the Hindu Council of Britain, have always been woeful and let Hindus down during their times of need. So what's happening is that we now need to see younger individuals who need to learn and read more and expand their reading skill set and look at contrarian views and to really try to understand the depths of this, because this has come about not just from colonial times, but specifically since 2014. It's quite remarkable how during Congress rule you saw very little of this type of propaganda, and since 2014 it has morphed. And even if Modi ji were to stand down tomorrow, but the BJP was still in charge, the media will now just shift to the new leader, because it's not always just about Modi, it's about the institution, it's about anything that is right of center. And, that's what the youngsters have to do. They just have to be exposed to more media such as this to understand what's going on. I think what's happened in the UK with the Leicester debacle really lays bare the horror of Hindu phobia that is besetting us. And in the US, we've seen very clearly the spike in hate crimes towards Indians and Hindus, and it's undeniable now that Hindu-phobic words, Hindu-phobic articles, Hindu-phobic media discourse leads to real-world consequences, and we've seen that now. It's undeniable. So my message to the youth is that they have to understand what's happening and that it's resulting in real world consequences, and that there will come a time where the violence can only spike, it can only increase. We just have to look at what happens in Bangladesh every Durga Puja. Every time that there are festivities, it's Hindus in Bangladesh that suffer, and they're the ones who are being killed and their temples vandalized and desecrated and looted. And now here in the UK, we've got confected narratives leading directly to Hindu-phobic hate crimes against innocent Hindus living their lives in Leicester and Birmingham and Coventry. And that's what it results in. And that's what it results in the US when we see incidents such as Taco Bell, and an individual who is attacked just for existing, just for being a Hindu, nothing less, not even antagonizing that individual. So those who are ignoring this issue, they need to know that there will be real world consequences, and it's already playing out. And we just want to hope that it doesn't lead to a greater spike in attacks on Hindus worldwide.
You have. I definitely admire your courage to come out and with such thoughtful, narrative that you are doing. Now, important part. Two things you mentioned in your presentation just now about Gandhi and RSS, and the third, the outcome of that is the narrative part of it. That's very important.
Yeah.
When RSS is being attacked by varieties of institutions that are targeting RSS, consequently Hindus, read Hindus as well, it takes me back to a very nice picture of Mr. Modi, which went viral on Twitter and other social media, in which the statement was, "They are not after me, they are after you." And when the finger was pointed out very directly, that they are targeting you, I'm just the means for that. It's very important. Where does the narrative from RSS come from? Because I am little, things is very simple. Whatever RSS is doing, you narrated it very well, that they are helping people. It is a Swayam Sevak Sangh. Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh. It is not a war organization. So they do seva. That's a point well taken. But when RSS is attacked in that vile manner, RSS needs to step up.
Yes.
It's machinery through their pracharaks. Now, pracharaks may be doing things silently and quietly. That is totally understood. But if you are not assertive with your voice, nobody is. And in the Western media, the way the media is controlled, then your voice is suppressed and it languishes. Nobody knows anything about it. What must happen on that? Then I will come to the Gandhi thing also very quickly.
Yeah.
But tell us about this, the RSS. How must RSS support its individual members or people who are not even members, but they're Hindus? Because RSS is the only organization, apart from ISKCON and whatever, that kind of represents Hindus as an institution. We don't have too many institutional representations around the world. RSS becomes that symbol, and they know that if you smash RSS, Hindus are gone automatically. What must RSS do at this point in time to support the global diaspora of not only Hindus but entire India, Bharat, as we call them?
Hmm. I'm glad you've talked about the fact that the RSS has not really done what it needs to do from a PR standpoint, because it has been sadly woefully inadequate. I think what the RSS needs to do is first it needs to tackle some of the age-old tropes and mistruths from the past. So even though Mohan Bhagwat has distanced himself from some of what Golkar has said in the past, it needs to be more explicit, because this is not the RSS of the 40s. This is the modern RSS that is shaped and changed with the times. And even at that time, that RSS that Golkar was governing and stewarding with Savarkar was born out of a nationalist struggle. And in any case, they were deemed not to have killed Gandhi, which is the constant lie which is always trotted out, that they assigned the murderer Godse to take care of Gandhi. So one thing the RSS certainly needs to do is to seize its destiny and take control of its own narrative. And Mohan Bhagwat has a huge following. He holds these symposiums sometimes and he talks about all of these issues, but often perhaps they are in Hindi, they're not distributed worldwide as much as they should. And certainly the RSS houses all around the world need to do far more. RSS in the UK is an extremely silent organization. They don't build their visibility at all. They simply don't get out there. There are shakas that are held, but they just don't talk about the work they're doing in the community at all. So from a PR standpoint, they must do much, much more. And part of that is dispelling a lot of the lies of the past, or at least distancing itself from that. Now, Mohan Bhagwat has said that on occasion, but it's always been done in India. It doesn't seem to pick up much traction. And perhaps they don't talk more loudly about the wonderful initiatives that they do. As I alluded to earlier, the RSS does have a Muslim wing. Now, this absolutely slaps down the argument of so many left-wing cabals and Islamists that the RSS is a Brahmanical, Muslim-hating organization. Why not talk to that wing? Why does that wing not talk more about itself and the wonderful work it's doing? So on that front, it needs to really take care of its own narrative and its PR offensive. And what's happening is that there is a certain mindset there of chalte hai, and thinking to themselves that, look, we're doing work, we know what our enemies are saying about us, we're fine, we don't need to do anything. But they need to realize that as they are being so compliant and so subservient in a sense, that all of their enemies around the world are spreading mysteries about them. So they really need to get out there and talk about the work they're doing, and to be extremely sincere about it, to treat it like a political campaign. And one way of doing that is to release more books, release more literature, to have media houses and forums on YouTube and other forums such as this. I mean, we can see with Man Ki Baat and what Modi ji is leading, how powerful that forum is. Why doesn't the RSS have a similar forum, for example, and think about having a similar space within other regions around the world, an English channel, for example? Those spokespersons are out there, but they're so very quiet. And I think in the wider diaspora, again, they just need to tackle their own history itself. We've seen Savarkar has been re-envisioned for a new generation due to these wonderful books from people like Vikram Sampath, for example. Why don't they embrace that resurgence? Because Savarkar is now more of a hero to most Hindus who know than Gandhi, certainly. So the RSS needs to embrace its history, be proud of its history, and embrace the tools of the day. They need to really think about PR in a more commercially savvy way that's appropriate for 2022.
Thank you very much. You bring in subject matters which falls straight into the segue of my next question, which I wanted to ask you. So you refer to Gandhi, and RSS needs to be more aggressive in its pronouncements and needs to contest. As a simple matter is that when the world media is against you, has branded you as evil, if you just remain compliant and quiet and you talk about the elements which confuse people, They end up confusing Hindus more than they support Hindus, many a time. Their work is awesome. It's very important, the Gandhi part here. Savarkar is known now. The Modi has done something truly remarkable. He has broken the myth of the Nehru Gandhi's superiority or the only freedom fighters kind of thing, that they were the only ones who did everything. Nobody else mattered. I'm talking about Gandhi here. He has now become Mahatma. We all know now the true story behind the Mahatma. We know a lot more. But in the global image, it's very interesting that he never got Nobel Peace Prize. But everybody considers him to the Mahan soul. My question is related to, and you talked about Nathuram Godse as well. There was a debate in Connecticut of school kids, and I was one of the judges. It was on Zoom, and in that, about 20 kids were participating, from 8-year young man to a 12th grader. They were all participating. They said the usual things about Gandhi, about satyagraha, civil disobedience, and everything else. Gandhi was a man of peace. But there was one common thread. About 17 or 18 of the 20 alluded to that Gandhi was killed by a Hindu nationalist, Nathuram Godse. That struck with me. And I asked that question. That Nathuram Godse operated perhaps as the lone wolf. Why perhaps? He was the lone wolf. He operated on his own belief. He was caught and he paid the penalty as per the law. The question here is, I asked the students, why the Hindu nationalist part is emphasized by you?
Yes.
Does anyone ever ask what was the religion of the man who killed Abraham Lincoln or John F. Kennedy or Robert Kennedy or Martin Luther King? Nobody asked the religion of those people, or the man who almost killed Ronald Reagan. But the media is immediately quick to paint Nathuram Godse, and the entire Hindu Samaj has to bear, if I may use the word cross, of Nathuram Godse and the reprisals of that. This is where RSS needs to come up. And with Modi breaking the Gandhi myth, so to say, a lot of people are saying Mahatma was not Mahatma, not my Mahatma. People have begun to create the doubt, and that is another image issue. Because the rest of the world will say, look at Modi, look at Hindus, they are running down the Mahanatma, which was known as. But it is a narrative story. How does one deal with that? Your thought on it? Because you have written, in your chapter, you have said there, India doesn't need another Gandhi. So tell us more about that.
Well, it's interesting with the adulation of Gandhi because left-wing cabals and left-wing conglomerates have, on the one hand, admired Gandhi because he was the warm, cuddly, inoffensive freedom fighter that they wanted. But on the other hand, if they so feel, they want to call him as a racist. So you can't please them either way. He is either a racist to them based on his time in South Africa, or he was a sex pest, or he was, a nice, peaceful freedom fighter. And what happens is that the Gandhi doesn't fit in the lens of what we need as Sanatanis, as a real freedom fighter. A real freedom fighter was Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, okay, or Savarkar. It wasn't Gandhi. So for them, Gandhi is a unchallenging, inoffensive, bland, easy type of freedom fighter who, importantly, was so eager to placate the Muslim League and Jinnah. And that for them is the reason why they tolerate Gandhi. That is why they like to elevate Gandhi as the ultimate freedom fighter, because he wore his religion on his sleeve, but he was seen more as being an individual who was so much about peace and inoffensive actions, and who was treated almost as a royal by the British, because while Savarkar was sent to cellular jail and left to rot and die, Gandhi was able to take his hunger strikes in a completely separate place. So even, of course, though he was despised by Churchill and the British autocracy, he was still seen by them as what he was, which was a safe, kind of freedom fighter, whereas someone like Bose had to be exterminated, absolutely. So really with Gandhi, it is a fact that they want to call him a Mahatma because in a way, they like the fact that he helped pave the way for the creation of Pakistan because he did so little to fight against it. And when it comes, we go back to the RSS and Godse and such. It is interesting that they want to attribute Godse's religion to him and as a reason for what he did. That when Jinnah led Direct Action Day, they don't want to talk about his religion and the reason for his proclamation. Neither do they want to talk about Surawardi and his religion in Bangladesh and for what happened in Noakhali, for example. So yes, Gandhi has always become over the years the easy freedom fighter, and that's why in the West has embraced him so much because he never really rocked the boat. He wasn't a Sardar Patel, he wasn't a boss, he wasn't someone who really put his foot down and stood for all Hindus and Bharat itself and stood for one indivisible India, which is what it should have been. It shouldn't have been partitioned, and the reason it was because of his acquiescence and because of his lack of organization.
That's such a refreshing thought for me, particularly because I consider myself on an above average basis that I know a little bit more about the history than majority of the people, and I'm very gratified that a young man like you has understood and you are operating on a very, very strong, correct wavelength of fixing the unfortunate truth. You know, you use the word, very, very sophisticated word, that he was an easy freedom fighter. That was such a wonderful thing to say. And yes, you are right. Well, Nehru and Gandhi spent their jail time in a five-star facility writing books and experiments of truth and diary to my daughter, and that has been eulogized by the Western media and the press and everybody. But the real struggle of Savarkar and others was completely written down or vilified. That makes it very, very significant. Now we have 8 more minutes to go. We have 3 statements made by one of our viewers, and I will get to that. But I wanted to ask you one more question here. It's very significant. That while the Western, and this is my experience, when we talk to the Western audience and tell them the truth, they appreciate it. But they say that most of the Indians themselves in this part of the world and your part of the world, they are more anti-India, anti-Hindu themselves. They are virtually become apologists for being a Hindu. And how does one address that scenario? This is the biggest challenge that we are facing. And you alluded to that earlier on, that they have very successfully, our enemies have very successfully put themselves as the victim corner, and we are the most peaceful one, are the oppressors. How does one fight that in the absence of an institutional framework? Because we don't have an institutional framework, whether here or in the UK, apart from a newly come up organization called KOHNA or Hindu American Foundation that are standing. Both of them are doing a great work, or institutions like Hindu Pact, and there are many are emerging now. It will take time. So, but then how does one go about it? The time is slipping away.
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge. There's no doubt about it. I think one of the best ways that what we can do to stay ahead is improve our media presence, amplify our voices. There are many organizations, many media organizations, even just like this, that are offering a different view, that are putting truth to power, questioning political orthodoxies. So I need to see more of those voices. We need to see more authors. We need to see more podcasts. We need to see more individuals on YouTube with their channels. We need to see more organizations who are willing to blog, pitch, just to get themselves out there. There's a defeatist element sometimes within the Hindu mind that says to themselves, well, no one's going to listen to my voice anyway. There's so many voices out there. I think I'll do nothing. But that is how the Islamist movement started in the beginning, but they never held back. And now what has happened to the point is that has birthed the term Islamophobia, that has birthed a situation where people are so afraid to offend Islamists or to question back Islamists or Islamist doctrine. So our reticence, our desire to stay in the shadows will only cause us harm. And I think it's playing out already. In the UK, I think British Hindus have woken up a bit in the last few months because of what's happened in Leicester. They've seen that if they do nothing, they will be attacked, they will be denigrated. Even in the US, we've seen with the hate crimes that the more you have individuals in Rutgers University and such spinning all of these lies and holding ridiculous events like dismantling Hinduphobia, that these lies, these confections, this propaganda, as I alluded to earlier, these words lead to real world consequences. And I think in the US, as we are seeing more Hinduphobic hate crimes growing exponentially and escalating in ferocity, that they're starting to realize, look, we can't afford to be so complacent. We can't afford to have others do the work for us because it is now open season on Hindus now. And, it is still 2 years till the next election in India, but the situation is only going to get worse. In the UK, we have so many NRIs. In the US, we have many NRIs as well. As that population increases, we're going to see more hate crimes. We're going to see greater attacks on who we are, our civilization, our country, where we're from, and we can't afford to be silent anymore. So I think what's going to happen is that you've got a younger, more educated group of civilians who are coming to these countries, and they're not willing to just see their culture and their history be denigrated so shamedly. So I think they're going to start to stand up for themselves. And what we're going to see is that there's going to be more organizations that are starting to grow, and those that have done nothing are going to have their feet held to the fire, as they should. So, I think it's just going to take a real offensive from the media side of things. There need to be more documentaries, there need to be more narratives that need to be put out there. We see great work on social media because there are lots of organizations and individuals that are quick to rebut a lot of the lies out there. But what's happening is that the same media houses have the power, have the money. They're still going to trot out the same lies. So we need to see more websites like OP India, for example. We need to see more channels like the Jaipur Dialogues. It needs to be frequent. It needs to be out there. It needs to, be in the in tray of every person out there purporting to paint Hinduism in a bad light, and that they need to understand that they can't get away with it. Very quick example here: Channel 4, which is a major media house in the UK, tried to ascribe complete blame for Leicester on the Hindu community. Due to the anger of the Hindus online who rebutted their arguments, they are now finally interviewing Hindus who are saying that we had nothing to do with it. We had nothing to do with the RSS. We don't even know who the RSS are. So even that's an example of a small victory. If you fight back against them with facts and you let them know that you will not take this abuse any longer, they will be forced to recant or to address the other point of view. So that's where the victory can lie.
Thank you. Let's switch to some of the observations and questions asked by some of the viewers, and we'll close after that. So let's ask. Can we go to the questions, please? We have Oneness is asking. Thank you, Oneness. Saurav, the importance of Hindutva will never be understood unless the slave mentality of the Indians is not brought out of the table. The message has to hit below the belt. Keep your answers short. Saurav, the statement is made to you.
Yeah, I understand what your poster means about behind the belt, below the belt. Don't over-intellectualize. Don't use lots of flowery, fancy language if you have to. Be to the point, be concise, be succinct. Arm yourself with facts.
Good. Next one is addressed to me. Vibhuti Ji, depending on the RSS is going down a beaten path. It's like pushing a pill down the throat. Right now, the entire communication needs to be modernized and in English. RSS website, X.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Couldn't agree more. Yes, Oneness, I agree with you too on this. Third one is again by Oneness, and thank you very much for your support, Oneness. There is a wonderful essay by Swami Chinmayanand, Let Us Be Hindus. It's an honest statement of where the Hindu cultures. It's important to make them feel proud of the Hindu culture by generating curiosity. I will add to this of Arvindo's article, The Bourgeois and the Samurai. That was an amazing essay written by Swami Arvindoji in 1917. So I urge everyone to read that if you want to begin your journey. Articles, essays by Swami Chinmayanand and Arvindo make a difference. Your thought on it?
Yeah, absolutely. Swamiji is a fount of wonderful knowledge, and I encourage everyone to read that too.
That's right. The last one, it seems, is from Oneness again. Saurav, you are talking so much of the RSS. Have they or any group protested at the British Embassy in India? And I think this particular thing need not be RSS alone. It has to be at the individual level as well.
Absolutely.
Because any organization can do only so much.
Mm.
To expect RSS to protest at the British Embassy is fine. I mean, I totally agree with that they must show this, instead of being compliant, the semblance of resistance ought to be there too, at an organizational level, particularly when you blame them or us, but at the individual level as well. Where was the protest against Leicester to the British Embassy in India? I mean, with so many, ridiculous resolutions passed in America against CAA and 370, there was no protest in India about that.
Yeah.
That does US have the locus standi and authority to comment upon other countries' legal matters? Whereas we are not commenting, India is not commenting on the Black Lives Matter and Antifa here. How do you talk about that? How does that happen? What will the individuals do to make a move on that?
What individuals can do is raise their voice in whatever fashion is comfortable to them, whether it's the written word, whether it's video, whether it's podcast, anything. Get your voice out there. Some people like to protest in person. Some people like to write about it. We need more voices. There's no doubt about that. I don't want to be the only one writing a book like this. I want many of your viewers to be inspired to do the same.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, viewers, and thank you, Oneness, for asking all these inquiries and making suggestions. Appreciate that. Jaipur Dialogue USA is back after 2-week hiatus, and we will be back next Saturday again. Thank you for joining. Like, subscribe, and share, and press the bell icon. We are coming back with lots of other interesting elements to discuss, basically to inspire the NRI diaspora worldwide to arise, awaken, and assert, and act, as I always prefer to say. Thank you, Saurav, for joining us. I would want you to show the cover of your book if you have it with you right there. Do you?
I don't have it right with me now, but I'm happy to share it with your viewers afterwards, perhaps on social media.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, viewers. See you next week. Satyamev Jayate.